recording.
All right. This is, I don't know what number meeting this is, but
Well, I don't know.
History of Animation by me.
Introduce yourself.
Wee, I'm Shayna. And look, it was a fancy slide. Anyway, I thought I'd start with some of my favorite examples of animation, just as like a little fun thing. So the one at the top right is from the Owl House, and I just think it's a really nice shot and really well done. The next one is this really old animation, and this guy's like, why do you have a raisin cake? And she's like, that's not a raisin cake. That's covered in flies, and he's so surprised he doesn't backbend. And I thought that was really weird. And the third one is this scene from a movie called Nimona, and I just think it's like, the animation is just really cool how it like glitches out. And that's about it, yeah. So next, the beginning. So I think this was like late 1800s. I can't pronounce what these things are called, but this is Phoenicus. I can't pronounce them, but they're like these really complicated names that are just like, when you spin me, I make movie type of thing, essentially. So I have like this video. I'm gonna kind of skip ahead, just so you can sort of see it working. So they have these things, which I can't remember what they're called, or I can't pronounce it either. But when they would spin, you would see movement, basically. And they were very simple, just a couple of different pictures. And then you had ones like this, which spun. See, it's kind of and when you look through it, there's a repeating motion, essentially. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to like the first big 2D animated character. So this was in 1914. Does anyone know what this character is called, perchance?
Jimmy.
No.
Oh, that's your name.
That's his name. Any other guesses? That was kind of close, not going to lie.
William.
No, you're getting farther.
Okay.
This is Gertie, and she's a dinosaur.
Different.
And there had been animated characters before that, but what was different about Gertie is she's the first one that kind of went viral, so to speak. Like, she was popular because she had a character that people were like, oh, this is cute. Like, she's a fun little character that I like. And I just want you guys to like keep this in mind. This specific one, just for a second. So Gertie was made in, I think, 1914, so over 100 years ago. And it's basically this dinosaur, and this guy's like just showing her off. Here's a little clip from Gertie. It's really long, so it's just like 10 seconds. Yeah, so here's one. It's one of these old. It's that old, but it's just.
Aww.
Yeah, she's really cute, and she has like a character, and that's when people fell in love with it. They're like, oh, that's cool, and that's when things started getting really popular doing that. Now from Gertie, no, stop video. After Gertie came Felix. This is Felix, exactly, Felix the cat. And Felix was a little cartoon character who was a cat, and he did Felix things. And he kind of came after Gertie a couple of years after that. I think in like the 20s, sort of, around then.
A balloon at the Thanksgiving parade.
And then after Felix came a really cool character, and he was kind of created by this guy whose last name was Disney, and it was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, not Mickey Mouse. See, Oswald was something Disney had made, but he didn't have the rights to him, so he got taken, and Disney got really pissed. And that's where Mickey Mouse came from, our really cursed Mickey Mouse right here. Mickey Mouse was actually drawn by this guy, who has one of the weirdest names I've ever heard, I'm not gonna lie, and I also didn't know how to pronounce it either, but it's Oob Iwerks. So he actually drew Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse was kind of just like revenge against Oswald a little bit, because Oswald was taken away. And actually Disney got Oswald back a couple of years ago, and it had been 80 years. Took them 80 years to get the rights back, but he's back. You remember that?
No, I met him at Disney.
You met Oswald at Disneyland?
Okay.
That's cool. I haven't met Oswald.
Rare creature.
A rare creature, a rare sighting. So now we're gonna go into Mickey Mouse a little bit. So a lot of people recognize this image right here, this little GIF. You probably see this when you open up a Disney movie and this comes on, he's whistling. This is Steamboat Willie. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. It was the first one released, but the actual first one was this one, which is called Plain Crazy. And you can even tell, like, he looks a little bit different. This was the first one drawn and made, but it wasn't released first. So this is Plain Crazy, and it was the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. And you can see how his character just evolved within like 3 cartoons, or 2 or 3 cartoons. Like, his eyes are different. He just looks a little different. It's kind of interesting to see that. So that's the first Mickey cartoon. I'm gonna go into cell animation now, just to kind of explain that. So cell animation is sort of like a way of, it's how a lot of movies were made before we had like digital drawing apps, you know? So you'd have your outline, your drawing, and then you'd have paint behind it. So like this is Homer Simpson, but then behind him, that's what he looks like on the back, you know? But you don't see that because there's lines here, obviously. That's sort of how it would be done. Like Plain Crazy is drawings, but this is color, so there's paint behind it, which makes a cell is on plastic. I think is the difference between drawings and the cell. So I just want to clear that up. In the bottom right, that's the Reluctant Dragon, and the reason I bring this up is because the Reluctant Dragon was a movie that was made by Disney, the studios, to show the process of making an animated movie. And it's actually really interesting, and they go through all different departments. They go through the sound, and they go through the cells, and they go through everything. They go through characters, they go through storyboarding. It's great. It's a great little movie. It's obviously not relevant now because we have different ways of doing things, but I still think it's really interesting. And if you want a more in-depth look at how they made the movies, then The Reluctant Dragon is a really good movie to watch. Here's some examples of things that are made with cell animation. So SpongeBob, the first season was all cell animation. We have The Simpsons and Akira. See, they're all made with cells. I didn't actually know SpongeBob was made with cells because it was made in 1999. You'd think, oh, we would have had other stuff. No. First season of SpongeBob was made with cells. You can physically buy SpongeBob on eBay, on the black market. Snow White came out in 1937, and it was the first feature-length animated film. So it was a full-length movie. It was all animated, which was really big. And it came out in 1937, so it's not quite 100 years old. It won't be for a while, but it was the first one. And then after that came Fantasia in 1940, which a lot of you might know from Sorcerer Mickey. And he's got his brooms and his hat. That was Fantasia, which was like a crazy, I think it's the word amalgamation of like a ton of different little mini shorts. They kind of just animators went wild, sort of thing. Or that's what it looks like. Kind of like, it's like you threw a bunch of paint at a canvas, but it came out really nicely. And then animation just kind of kept going. We got Sleeping Beauty, we got The Great Mouse Detective. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It's a funny little movie. We had, wrong button. Ren and Stimpy, which is the cartoon that kind of spawned SpongeBob. It was like SpongeBob on steroids a little bit. And it was more intense. We also had Aladdin, Hercules, and The Prince of Egypt. These are all 2D animated movies. Julia likes The Prince of Egypt.
Love that movie.
And also Spirited Away. Something that's interesting about Aladdin, Hercules, and Prince of Egypt, I'm not sure about Spirited Away, is that they all use 3D animation, or like computer animation. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but in The Prince of Egypt, some scenes, they look a little funky, and that's because they're combining the 2D and the 3D together, which is really interesting. And it's kind of interesting, I'm going to go on a little tangent. The reason I learned this was a thing in the first place is because I was at the dentist, and Aladdin was on, and I noticed that like lion's mouth he goes into looked a little funky. It looked 3D. It didn't look like it was made in 2D, and it was. I think that cave was made in 3D animation. Someone's got to fact check me, but that's when I searched it up and researched it, that was what it was saying. So all of these movies have elements of computer animation in them. Before I segue into that, I want to take a quick pause, and we're going to bring out something kind of cool. So quick pause. My dad was very gracious to bring some things from his collection. So these are all cells and drawings from some of the past examples. So do you want to, because
Sure.
they're yours, do you want to explain them?
So this one here is an original drawing from Steamboat Willie that the cells were made from. There are no cells really that exist from that because they used to wash the cells and reuse them for the next cartoon. They were also very flammable and explosive. So this is an original drawing from Steamboat Willie.
You can come like take a look if you want. Just don't bring any like food near it, because
Um,
you know, just in a frame, but still.
Going a little bit out of order, let's go back even further in time. Shayna was talking about Gertie the dinosaur. So this is an original drawing that was in the film Gertie the dinosaur. It was actually one of the ones that Shayna pulled up a frame from.
That's why I said keep that in mind, because that frame is the same frame that's here.
So there's very few of these around, as you might imagine. This is, as Shayna pointed out, 100+ years old.
How many?
Just a little bit.
But what's
older than
interesting
you.
about this, as she pointed out, they weren't using cells yet, so they had to redraw this background every single frame and draw the things that were moving and the things that were not moving over and over and over again.
And it's really incredible because I don't know if you've ever tried animating, but if you try to draw every frame, it gets really shaky. It goes like this.
Yeah.
But they were so specific in how they did it that you see a little bit of a shake, but it's not really that noticeable. So it's really incredible how specific they were able to be when drawing.
So to your point, the one they had to keep it from shaking, you'll notice in the top of this drawing, in all the corners, there's little X's. And that's how they lined it up, so that the frame before it and the frame after it were registered to each other. So the drawings weren't going like this, they were at least attempting to keep them in the exact same place.
How many frames were there?
I don't know. That's a good
24
question.
frames per
Oh.
second.
I think she means in the whole. You mean in the whole Gertie?
Oh, I don't
mean,
know.
That's a much better estimate for
Yeah.
you know.
So-
Well, if it's 24 frames a second, we can estimate it based on how long it is.
Yeah, exactly. That one.
That's a good question. I can look that up later if you want.
So going back in time a little more,
Actually, forward from Gertie.
we have a drawing from Plain Crazy. And here's something to make a note of. They had finally figured out that instead of pasting these pages down on board and putting little X's, they punched holes in the paper. And then they had a hole puncher, a hole receptacle, so you'd put the drawing on the peg holes, and that would keep every drawing and subsequently every cell in registration.
To keep it from shaking.
Exactly.
Again.
This is Felix the Cat from the 1920s. Got that. And then, before I jump into the future a little bit, one last piece from the Golden Age. This is Mickey Mouse from Fantasia,
Sorcerer?
from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And they were really kind of, you know, catching their stride, as it were. So, you know, this is shaded the way they were instructing the cell painters to color the cells and that kind of stuff. Move this down a little bit. And then you jump into the future and you've got Shayna's SpongeBob,
Oh my
which she
God.
pointed out is they did the first season of some SpongeBob on cells before it went to digital. So this is from the first season. The background is not real, but the cell is an original cell. And that's what I have for you guys to support the history of animation.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Thank you
Crazy.
for
Wow.
explaining that. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of people, like my dad, collect these things because it's just really cool to have a piece of what made these things with you. Like, this is as close as you can get to SpongeBob without kidnapping the voice actor type of thing. You know? Like, and it's kind of cool. You can see all the drawings. I think I read something that said Oop Iworks did like 700 drawings a day, 400,
Here's like
400, something crazy like that. And you think all these things, 400, whatever. We'll call it 500.
Oob Iwerks drew this drawing and this drawing.
So that's a lot to do in one day. Like digitally, I can't do 400 in a day. It took me 7 hours to do like maybe 20 or 30. And that was like everything. So it takes a long time. That's really impressive. Now, as I was saying before, moving on, these 3 movies all have elements of computer animation in them, which brings us to 3D animation, brings us out of 2D. So this is the start of 3D animation. This is a Pixar short released in 1988 called Tin Toy. It was like just a couple minutes long. It was about a toy who's like running away from like a crazy baby in like a bedroom. It's a really creepy baby, and I don't have a picture of it, but you can look it up. It's like worse than Ice Age Baby. We all know Ice Age Baby is bad. This is worse. And they said it was so popular. They said, we're gonna make a sequel to Tin Toy. And this sequel, it came out in 1995. Does anyone know what that sequel is?
Toy Story.
Toy Story. That sequel became a full-length 3D animated movie called Toy Story, which 5 movies now. But in 1995, it was the first full-length 3D animated movie, and that's why we have Woody, who doesn't have a hat. Pixar in general, I don't have a source for this. I couldn't remember exactly what I was watching, but Pixar released they release a lot of things. They released something talking about the past and how they make their movies, and they were saying how while they're making their films, they're also learning. They were creating the technology. I think one thing was that when they were creating Monsters Inc., or when they were doing something with hair and fur, they created the technology to make that happen. Nowadays, you just go into Blender, you just plug in a couple numbers, and you've got a ball covered in fur. But Pixar, like, they made this. They had to figure out how to do that, and this was in, like, the 90s and 2000s. They were figuring this all out, which now became the tools they use today. And here's a quote that I got from Wikipedia, which was, Pixar started in 1979. It was a computer division. It was the graphics group, just kind of paraphrasing. And it was funded by Steve Jobs. So it was I like to think of it as like a different, kind of equivalent to JPL, which was like just people blowing up their bedroom, and then became something that was kind of Pixar but animation. They just were a little group that became something big. This actually leads us to something that I believe is called the Pixar effect, which I don't know if you guys know what that means. Does anyone know what that means? No? Okay.
Has to do with the Pixar movie?
Kind of. Specifically these are Disney Pixar movies, but this kind of applies to a lot of animated movies. Does anyone notice anything about all of these characters?
The proportions aren't right?
They look
No.
the same.
Yes, Julia, they look the same. Wreck-It Ralph, he doesn't look like Merida, but he does have similar features. He's like, for lack of a better word, smooth. And like, he's got big eyes, you know? They all share that. Like, this is a picture from Wreck-It Ralph 2 with all the princesses. Look at them all. Like, they're all very similar looking. And this is kind of a weird point in 3D animation when things start to all kind of mesh into one, which isn't great because that kind of loses like things looking different. And you kind of see that, I guess, in like old 2D animation too. A lot of like the characters, they have some like builds and whatnot. But then one day, and I'm not saying this is the only one, but a couple of years ago we started getting things like this, like Spider-Verse, for example, which are crazy looking, and they combine elements of 2D and they create different looking things. Like this guy looks like he's from a comic book. You know, this is wild. You don't see that in Moana. You know, I'm not saying Moana doesn't look good, but it looks different.
Yeah, what are you saying, Shayna?
I don't know what I'm
Moana
saying.
doesn't look good?
But, you know, Spider-Verse played around, I'm going to talk about Spider-Verse a little bit. Spider-Verse played around with a lot of different techniques. For example, they played around with frame rates, which is really interesting. Some characters were animated on different frame rates than the other ones, which is crazy.
What's a frame rate?
Oh, frame rate, good question. Let me explain frame rates in this corner over here. So, animation is usually done at 24 frames per second, which means every second there are 24 individual pictures. Animating on ones means that every single one of those pictures is like something different happens. It makes like a very smooth movement, you know? Animating on twos means that every other one is drawn. So it would be a little less smooth. So sometimes Miles would be animated on twos, and other characters would be animated on ones, which makes their movements a little bit different. So it's kind of gives it a sort of look which is a little different. And that's what you can do the math and get all different, like animating on 3s and whatever. But that's what that means. We also get movies like Puss in Boots a couple years later, which Julia, you might have heard this. When this guy came on screen, I audibly gasped in the theater because he looked amazing. Because the animation just looked so different and was so detailed and gorgeous. This is a shot from the movie.
Yeah.
This isn't edited in back here.
The fighting scenes were very unique.
Thank you, Julie. That's kind of my point. Like, things started to sort of branch off. And although they still have that, like, big-eye, cartoony look, the way they were animated, just everything started to shift. And you can sort of see it in, like, the chunkier movement and some of, like, when he runs by, let's see who shows it. You see, like, white lines come out. Like, different styles coming together. Another example, one of my new favorite movies, is Nimona, which, although again has the big eyes, whatever, its shading is very unique, which you can sort of see here best. It's a little hard without like watching the movies, you know, but you can sort of see here. It had very interesting shading, and again was sort of drifting away from that very Pixar round face, big eyes sort of look. And lastly, not my favorite movie on the list, but I can't deny that it also looks very different. So these animation is starting to again split off into a whole new direction. Like look at the people. Look at the people.
What movie is this?
This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. And something that struck me was, do you have a question?
A lot of it is like 3D. That's like made to look like 2D, right?
Yeah, a lot
It's
some
sort of
movies do that.
stylized, yeah.
And some go the opposite direction. There's a movie that was made in 2D and looks 3D. I know that I don't have on here, but I should. I haven't seen it, but I know there was a whole process to doing that. But my point is that we went from 2D, we went into 3D, which was this crazy new invention, and then everything started to be very same, and now we're sort of drifting into more unique styles again. Like, look at the people here. They're very interesting designs. They're all like, they're shaped differently, they use different techniques. It's just a very interesting way they've done this. And overall, I think it's just a very cool direction that animation is going into. We've gone from a dinosaur ripping up a tree and throwing a mammoth into water, Gertie, you know. We've gone to Felix, we've gone to Mickey Mouse, who's just like, I still laughing. We've gone to Mickey Mouse, who's flying his little plane around the screen and driving his boat, to things like this, which are gorgeous. And I just think that's a really interesting evolution that's taken place over the last 110 years or so. And that is, like, just to recap, where we've gone from this to Gertie, to Mickey, to Snow White, to 3D, Pixar, Disney, and to where we are now, where things are starting to split off again. And that is my abridged history of animation.
Wow.
So yeah, any questions? And also my sources.
Thank you.
I don't know what the next voting topics are, but
What
does any guy
did you, what,
don't judge my sources.